how important is it to share the gospel with words? You've got this kind of, I don't think anyone would disagree that it's important to live the gospel, to live like Jesus, and people will say it's important to share the gospel because at its core, the gospel is a message. Like it is, you can't live in a way that tells them that 2,000 years ago Jesus died on a cross and forgave their sins, and now God's reaching out to them and wants a relationship. They can get glimpses of that, and they can catch parts of God's love through your life, but they can't say yes to God without some kind of a message. So how important is it? How did I have that? How important is it to share the gospel with words? Is it enough, just to live it and hope that people ask? Yep, that's the question.
You guys want to close this?
You guys can fight over it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'll see what it feels like to talk first. Jesus is our model. He did an awful lot of living it and talking about it. And so I just want to let you know that I don't believe there is any dichotomy between living for Jesus and talking about him. And again, it's who you are. It's how you live. It's how you love. Therefore, to live it is to talk about it, right? I think it's really interesting, too. We need to understand, so I want to say, yes, talk about it. If you're living it, you're talking about it. But also, we just read in the Bible reading plan in John 10 where it talks about, even the works of Jesus, his miraculous works, were bearing witness of who he was. The Pharisees are asking, tell us plainly if you're the Son of God. He said, I did tell you, but you didn't believe. The works I do in my Father's name speak on my behalf. So you're talking about it, but you're not necessarily just talking about it with words, right? It's the words and the works. It's how you live. It's what you say. It's a package deal. It's all of it. So don't get into this thing in your head like, do I need to tone it down? Do I need to turn this up? Here's what you should get into instead. Be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. Build a relationship with him. And sometimes he'll say, yeah, don't take that bait, or wait, just listen right now. Don't say anything. Or sometimes he'll say, now. Like, you need to tell them Jesus loves them right now. I think that always being ready, you should always be ready, but then in the moment you're trying to be sensitive to what God is doing. And I think that's the gist of what I have to say.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, obviously prayer is paramount both before and after. But a lot of it to me comes down to the environment of the person that you are evangelizing to. Somebody that's facing a leg amputation or something. I'm not going to go out and, start, justifying something by the Bible or whatever. You're going to be very sensitive to them. But the environment I find myself in a lot is the people that really don't need anything materially. They're not struggling, and those are the hardest people. And I think, honestly, if we'd be honest with ourselves, a lot of people think, well, they've got money. They don't need witness to. And I think that's an attitude that needs to change. They're just as debased as somebody that's, on food stamps and being helped by a system. So for me, definitely words are the most important thing, because a lot of times they're living at a higher lifestyle than higher whatever than I am. And so I find that for me, in my mission field, if you call it that, my evangelism field, just doesn't work. I don't have access. I have access to a certain type of person for the most part. And if I ask to pray for them for something they're lacking, they're probably not going to even engage with me. So I've got to engage them intellectually. I was working over at Genesis and for a long time and ran into a lot of the people like that, the chief medical officer. I had a debate with him one time. It was very short. But this is a guy. This is a guy that drives a Maserati, and he's probably making $1 million, $1.5 million a year. He's not going to want somebody in a Geo Prism talking to him, about success and stuff. So, but yeah, I think words are very important. I think too, building, the way you evangelize sets up the framework for discipleship, right? Several fundamental questions answered can paint the picture, and then your next part in your walk as a new believer for these folks is to go with that framework, grow with the Lord, walk with the Lord, and become a disciple. And so it's not just about, salvation and ending up in heaven is just a little part of what God has to offer. Don't think about salvation. You've been born again, you're saved. Man, this world becomes, your place in this world becomes way better. Your perspective changes, your life gets better. You have that conduit to God. It's just not about salvation specifically. That's just a piece of it. But
I do think that in most relationships you get to a point where you do really need to share outwardly and openly with words, because I think at least right now culturally, and this may be shifting, but I think we have been living in a moment, and maybe still are, where people aren't necessarily just going to come out and ask, like, why are you so nice to me? Or like, why, you seem like a person full of integrity. What's different about you? Like, I don't have a lot of opportunities to answer those questions. Now, hopefully that doesn't say something about my life of integrity. But I don't find a lot of people who are spiritually curious if you at least aren't putting out something that lets them know that you're a person who's open to that kind of conversation. That being said, I have found that, especially if you're in this, like if you're playing the long game, so if you're in a relationship with someone and you're praying for them and you're rubbing shoulders with them regularly, those kind of acts of service or kindness are things that open the door, So I have found that, again, if I'm like, when I'm praying for my neighbors, sometimes it's in the very moment that I'm praying for them that I think, oh, maybe I should like take dinner to them this week. And I have a neighbor who multiple times has said, how do you always know when I like really need someone to bring dinner to me? And it didn't even feel like a word from the Lord when I thought, maybe I should take dinner to her. And, after taking dinner a couple of times, then it's a lot more natural to say like, hey, I've got this Bible study at my church. Do you think you'd want to come? And she says, yeah, I think that's something I really should do. And so I think that those ways that we serve people and love them, outwardly, are also open the door for the spiritual conversations and sharing the gospel with them.
Yeah, I think that's great. That goes along with what I've found. It's like people will try to put you in whatever kind of box based on your behavior, and you're not in control of what box that is. And that might be like, hey, Katie's just a nice person, and that's it. Like, she's just one of those nice people, or she's a kind person, or, oh yeah, this person, he's just has a lot of integrity. And then it's like, oh, and they go to church, and those are relatively disconnected boxes that people can put you in. And I haven't seen a lot of people like ask kind of on the basis of like, oh, something's different. Something has to be really, really different to be like radical Jesus different, sacrificing self for other people, to get those kinds of questions. And that's tough for me, kind of like trusting in that strategy that people ask. Sorry, I'm just kind of processing this, but it's hard because then it's like, then I am a passive. I have a passive role in sharing faith when Jesus told me to do that, and I'm just hoping somebody else gives me an opportunity to do that instead of kind of being conspicuously spiritual and not trying to force things, but going that route. And another thing to that is, it's light. Living like Jesus is light, and if I just think of all the jobs that I've worked at, and like in some I'm like, if I'm going to work at this job, like I'm serving God and not just people, I'm going to go the extra mile. I'm going to do things. And none of my coworkers are asking me what's different about me. They're saying, wow, Cameron's really making us look bad because he's doing all the stuff that we should be doing. And what's your problem? Stop. Like they're just focused on bringing me down to their level. And it's like, well, this isn't working. Like this isn't a difference that's being seen as positive. So the light's actually inspiring a negative reaction against kind of the way Jesus would have you act. So that makes it really, really challenging.
Let me say one last thing. Real quick, real simply, the question is, do we share the gospel with how we live, or do we have to put words with that too, right? Yes. The answer is yes, as Darren says, and it's a check and a balance. If you are living for Jesus, it will help you want to talk about him. If you are talking about him, but your life isn't really lining up, like you create a discipline of sharing your faith with people, but your life's tanking and you're not really walking with Jesus, when you go out and share about him and his goodness and his love and his blessings, it will help you get your life where it needs to be, because the gospel, it's like you're reminding yourself of the gospel. But if you're not talking about it, if you're not keeping the gospel at the front of your mind, it's easy for your life to go astray from that also. Does that make sense? So the two strengthen each other. Don't pit them against each other. They're both to help you, and they're both to help the world.